Tanium and ServiceNow have taken the inefficiencies out of vulnerability management. See how all that scanning, reporting, patching, and approving is now completely automated. So we've brought the vulnerabilities in. We can see the reports. We can see the data. We've opened an incident. Where do we go to actually do change controls to remediate these and to deliver patches to these endpoints?
Yeah, good question. So the first step is to make sure you understand the architecture behind the scenes on how patching and vulnerability management work together. So ServiceNow has actually separated that out into a separate plugin for the VR product called Patch Orchestration. And Patch Orchestration was designed to work with the VR hand in hand to be able to give you the relationship between this vulnerability on the screen and its potential patches. So what that means is that in order for you to understand a potential patch for a vulnerability, first, you need to have a solution that can do both, or possibly integrate two solutions into a simplified view like this. The benefit of Tanium in this context is that you're going to have both of those records inside from the same agent that's on the machine. So we're going to have the patch information, and we're going to have the vulnerability information from the same agent. So that makes it easy for Tanium to say, hey, here's a list of patches for this vulnerability. And by the way, it's related to a vulnerability CVE, a third-party detection that we found, and it's also across many different computers. So this one potential patch could potentially mitigate risk and solve for those vulnerabilities across many machines. So it's a one-to-many setup in ServiceNow. So actually, let's walk through the overall patch piece of the integration, because what's really important is it's very similar to how we work with the actual the vulnerability items integration, but it also has an element of bringing patches and device information into ServiceNow with relevance to the CVEs. So we have an integration called Tanium VR Patch Orchestration. And Patch Orchestration, once it's enabled and installed through the guided setup, which is very straightforward, it's the exact same setup as your regular Service Graph connector with a token, etc. And what we do with this setup after we set it up with the basic information is we pull all of your patches into ServiceNow as individual records. And individual records now are available in ServiceNow to report against. So first step of patch management is to know exactly what patches are out there, first of all, from the different repositories of Linux, Windows, whatever, right? And be able to then contextualize that with applicability on endpoints. So you think about a patch that's here, and it's fairly obvious this is for Ubuntu, right? And there are two Ubuntu devices that I have. So you're going from a patch profile here that may or may not have any sort of remediation, but it's available as a patch record to report against, and it gives you a reference to the configuration item in your CMDB. If these servers are critical to my organization, I'm going to be able to understand the level of risk of me not fixing this or patching through my Ubuntu list of things that I have to remediate. So now we look at the relationship between a computer or a server and a patch record, and that's interconnected in ServiceNow and driven by the Tanium data initially. The patch view here, this is all my patches, by the way, that I pulled in from our demo environment. There will be Windows patches here. There will be Linux patches, etc. Now, Windows patches have slightly more information about the cab file as well. We will pull in source severity and supersedence, etc., etc. If this had a device that is applicable for it, it would show up here, right? So there's a lot of different relationships around devices, vulnerabilities, actual deployments you've executed in ServiceNow for Tanium, and a request for a patch going through approvals, etc., before you actually deploy it. We're going to walk through this step next with the way that we go through change control. But I wanted to show this view actually because most customers today do not have a way of managing patch data and visibility and applicability of patches in the system that they also have CMDB data. So we've really brought that to the market so then people can report on insights, analytics, trending lines, and the level of risk exposed based on their ServiceNow environment data and the patch information that Tanium is providing.
So you think about what a true CMDB is about. It's about not only the individual asset data, but its relationship to other data. So we're really augmenting that experience on the ServiceNow side to incorporate also the patch status, vulnerability status of those same CIs. I like it.
Yeah, how powerful is that? As a person who's in IT ops or a patching engineer, if I could easily answer the question from the security side, if the CISO asked me, how come these are not patched? Or what is my risk if I don't patch this? I can confidently go in ServiceNow and pull that information through our reports from Tanium and be able to give them a real-time answer to those questions, and then pivot into a risk mitigation plan, which could be as easy as going into the vulnerability itself or going into the group of vulnerabilities, and then be able to go through a change process, which we're gonna talk about right now. What happens in a scenario when a remediation manager of vulnerabilities logs into ServiceNow? The first step they're going to take is they're going to have a bunch of different items for them to work on, right? And this is grouped by SLAs. These are requirements by, maybe there's internet-facing servers, or I can group my work by what makes it easy for me to work on first based on affected platforms, the stuff we were talking about earlier. I could do affected product, maybe it's Adobe vulnerabilities, et cetera, et cetera. So whatever your requirements are, and whatever your SLAs are, we would configure them in ServiceNow as a remediation task. And that allows us to then make sure when someone logs in to do their work as a remediation person or vulnerability manager, they can know exactly what to work on. It will be available for them. Now that I know what I need to work on and what's prioritized for me, I can pivot directly into the remediation steps, which is clicking a button. When you click a button called Create Change, Tanium has its own form inside of ServiceNow called Create Change Request Tanium. This allows us to make sure that everything that we do in this change also can have a level of patch deployment relationships and data. So you can indicate that you want to patch this like this, and you want to give it a name, you want to select your patch, whatever that might be, and you want to give it an end time and start time, etc. Now, this is nothing new for most VR customers. Most customers are aware that there's a capability like this. And for those of you who don't know about this, this is the way to connect the dots between vulnerability, a remediation, and an actual deployment of a patch directly through your change. So let's create the change request, and let's actually go through and see what it looks like. I'm going to give it a time of 14:06. And so the first step that it takes is it pivots into a actual change view. So you might have different change types inside of ServiceNow. You might have different approvers for different OS groups or different type of stakeholders that might be impacted, such as business application owners, that those business applications run on these servers. So before you actually do the deployment or execute the implement phase of the change, you want to make sure that you have a level of governance and a level of control, and then also approvals across the different stakeholders. So we'll go through our typical process of planning, scheduling, looking at conflicts, et cetera, as your typical change process. Now, what you're going to see is a couple of different things show up as we move through this process. You're going to see how many affected computers are going to be part of the change. So I had 17 computers. But as soon as I created this change, I actually did a lookup with using the Tanium integration to check to see if these patches are already applied. Some of these computers already have the patch applied. So I have absolutely nothing to patch right now. This is great. My critical VITs or vulnerable items are actually patched already on most of my machines. So which is great, right? Now, in a typical situation, you're going to have a bunch of computers here that may be applicable for that patch. And so as we go through the process of approvals, you're going to eventually end up inside of the implement phase. soon as those approvals are done.
People usually dread writing the change description, the justification, but I'm looking at what's in here and like the justification down there. This change is required to address 784 vulnerabilities. It's like it wrote the change request for you. This is beautiful.
It does, yeah, and it does it based off of the remediation task we originally configured here. Because what it's really doing is it's allowing us to take information from the remediation task and kind of look at, okay, you have all of these vulnerabilities on individual machines, but not a lot of them are going to be vulnerabilities that are actually awaiting implementation or vulnerabilities that are already closed. So as I said earlier, I've already done a lot of this patching and they may be nothing for me to do. So it assumes that there are at least 17 CIs based on the last time we did this, and it will carry over that configuration that we found in our preview or whatever it is over to the change and make sure that you have a justification put there. But also, that does, like I said, that doesn't mean that that's what's actually going to get patched. It gets you started and it gets you scheduled with certain dates and stuff. As long as you fill in the right information in the previous screen, it will get you started. And then typically a CAB manager or a vulnerability manager will come in here and augment that as they go through the change process. Yeah. You remember when you said you had the Tanium button in the ITAM integration? So isn't it interesting that you also see that in the vulnerability change request? What if you need to do a bunch of checks first on a given computer? What if you need to take a look at a list of things as part of your step? So you can actually take a bunch of these configuration items and directly connect into a machine from the change itself as well. So leveraging the ITAM or IT operations integration that we have, which is the introspect UI, this button will also be available in all changes, incidents, and CI records. So
How about let's go to configuration item, put PRF in the name there.
sure.
There we go. Grab one of those, and then you can hit the launch live UI. Now this is
Yeah,
nice.
this is a really, really important part because as you folks saw in the other video, and if you haven't seen it, I would suggest you watch it. You can do pretty much any query in this view before you progress to the next stage of the change. So as a change manager, as a vulnerability manager, I might want to verify that there's a vulnerability or verify that there's a deployment or something that's going on. Any type of thing you can think about in terms of actions and queries, you can run it before you actually get further along in the change. You can also see the health, right? 100%. And I think a lot of you saw the sensors and actions that are available. But if there's a problem with one of our endpoints, you probably don't want to deploy a patch. You probably maybe want to create a change task to investigate the problem with the computer before you go through with the patch deployment, because that likely is going to fail, right? So there's a lot of if and what to do scenarios before the change that now you're able to execute them directly through the change.
All right, couple questions then. So on the introspect page, we could have one of those query sensor button options there that would go out and look at a particular patch, applicable patches or something like that. There was all these sensors for patch detection. So we could add those sensors to this button and we could use that to validate what's this current status.
Absolutely, yeah. And you could also do like subnet lookups and registry lookups, et cetera, et cetera. So anything that you think is relevant to perform a series of checks, and that could be because you have a implementation plan that is
Mm-hmm.
obviously, but you might also have a test plan, a backup plan. Of course, you're going to have all of that. So as part of your risk and impact analysis, you could have a series of steps that you automate through the CI introspect, and then
All right.
provide proof so then people can make a approval decision for the change.
So scroll back up here to the CI configuration item. So this change is going to apply to multiple endpoints. Help me understand why. Do we have to list just one endpoint in the configuration item there?
No, actually, that's why this is not a mandatory field. So
Okay.
bit of the change is that you have an affected CI list here.
Okay. There we go.
That is all of the, and this took a little bit of time to show because it does a scan, right? So now here's a list of 18 CIs that are actually able to have a potential patch. So I'm going to share one more thing in here that might also show, us deciding on what CIs are going to be part of this change. So give me 1 second, I'll refresh. But the more important thing here is that affected CIs are going to be populated automatically. Your CI at the change level is what's part of the initial change request. Now, typically, like I said, this is usually empty because your change will be to one, two, or many different CIs, not just one.
Okay. So I just want to pause here for our viewers for a second. Uh, so what we're looking at is a change request that was already filled out with all the affected endpoints, the vulnerability data, the justification was written for you, and you didn't have to type any of that. You didn't have to import any lists from anywhere. That was all automatic. I just have to say that's some serious automation that's going to save a lot of time in creating change requests for patching.
Absolutely. And one of the other things that we didn't really get into is not only do you know the risk of all the CIs automatically populated here, but you also get to see the business impacted services that are running on those CIs, et cetera, et cetera. So all of the relationships that come with your CIs also are part of the risk calculation and the overall change itself. One-stop shop for all the info you need to make a decision to either go through with the deployment or not.
All right, so I'm watching the clock. We're running out of time. I want to see how do we move from here to actually, because I've heard we can actually push patches then from ServiceNow. Is that right?
That's exactly what we're doing. Absolutely. So once it's approved and in the implement phase, what you're going to see in service or in Tanium is actually the patch gets deployed in our patch product. So you remember the vulnerable wall 0010025. This is my remediation task. So I actually did the deployment prior before we actually started recording, and really what you're going to want to see here is that we have our remediation task right there. So if you look at this, this came in through ServiceNow and it deployed one patch and it impacted 2 endpoints. Now, this is still running, but if you look at the status of this, right, when we started it, it went from downloading to download complete, installing, and sometimes what happens is they have a pending restart. They have post patching steps to the templates that we have. So whatever happens here, we basically target everything coming from ServiceNow, and then we do a scan to make sure that they're applicable in real time. Then we download and then we install, and all of this is done in the background, right? You don't have to worry about any of this. Tanium does this automatically, and it will come back and it will update your closure notes to tell you that this patch has been successfully deployed across X amount of machines. And then you can go back and take a look at your vulnerability task. And what you're going to find is that all of your vulnerabilities in that task are now either closed, as this view is going to show me here, which is all of these 17 CIs or whatever they were. And it will automatically come back and close everything for you. So you don't have to manage now going back and closing individual records or meeting a certain SLA requirement.
Wow, this is just to summarize, this is full circle. So Tanium scans the environment for vulnerabilities, reports those to ServiceNow, where you can automate the change, filling out the change request details. Once it's approved, you get the implementation. It'll push those patches back through Tanium to the endpoints where you then rescan, see that they're complete, the data comes back, and then it closes. Is that automatic? Do I have to do anything to close that change, or is it automatically just going to, in the next run cycle, it'll see the data, update it, and close it automatically? How does that work?
Yeah, good question, Ashley. So we kind of separated the processes out. So once we deploy the patch, right after that deployment, typically what happens is our Tanium integration also includes a current status integration in the background. So inside of Tanium, there is a job called the CVE status integration job. And going back to Connect that I was showing you earlier, this CVE status integration is responsible to do real-time queries into Tanium and find everything that's been closed or patched in the last X amount of time. It could be 45 days, 2 days, 1 day, whatever it is. As soon as it finds that in a couple of seconds, it will then package up a closure command to ServiceNow. So you don't ever have to worry about rescanning or doing anything in ServiceNow. We will do that for you in Tanium, and we will auto close all the open vulnerabilities in ServiceNow every single day, even every other hour if you want, whatever your schedule is. But we do it on a separate connection so it doesn't impact your ServiceNow instance and bog down yet another process happening in ServiceNow.
That's amazing. That is full circle. So, as somebody who's not accustomed to this ServiceNow VR interface, I know it looks like it's going to take some time to get used to it. But the beauty here is that the level of integration. It's just all the data that you need is right there at your fingertips. It's in your comfort zone of your ServiceNow CIs. And you've got, and again, what I like about this is you don't have to go to another tool. Once it's set up, you can get all the data you need that's feeding all of your corporate reports right there in ServiceNow.
Exactly that, Ashley. And we want to ensure that customers have ease of use across multiple data sets, multiple processes, and multiple groups of people, but yet be able to do that in a UI that is seamless, straightforward, and be able to connect the dots without investing a lot of time and effort to integrate with other tooling. Consolidate and simplify to bring these life cycles to life in your environment very quickly. This is a typical 1 hour implementation, and you have both patching and ServiceNow vulnerabilities all integrated within that one session. And by the way, I would have to mention that this is tested in some of the largest environments of ServiceNow, meaning that we are already doing this in some of the biggest customer environments of ServiceNow globally. So we are the one solution that can support extreme scalability and then be able to also do scalability around remediation and patching the same way that we do patching in Tanium, which a lot of us are familiar with, that is very unique to the Tanium architecture that allows us to patch very, very quickly across millions of machines versus the days and weeks that typically are normal for other solutions out there in the market.
So, like we opened up with different teams, different tools, trying to tell each other what to do and prove they did it. This is really brings teams together here. I'm really curious to hear, you said some of the largest companies in ServiceNow deployments are using this. So I'm curious, what have you heard from customers as far as the impact this has had on their normal change process for patching?
What we monitor in terms of metrics with customers are things like patch efficacy, right? And we also monitor time to detect vulnerabilities. We also are very close with customers around SLA, meeting or exceeding or failing to meet SLAs. And these metrics are very, very important for the CISO, for the CIO, pretty much everyone across the organization. What I hear from customers is that Tanium went from us being 40% compliant around patch efficacy to 99% compliant. And Tanium also allowed us to prove to auditors that we did follow SLAs, we met them. We also have an audit trail of everything we did on the front end, which is the ServiceNow environment using Tanium. So audit becomes easy to pass. You are meeting and exceeding your SLA expectations. What I hear from customers is they're also able to now consolidate their multi-tool, multi-process, multi-team work into a simplified way, which also reduces time. So we've made it easy and simplified for customers to now work with their processes versus working with multiple processes and tooling.
I can't think of any IT ops or security team that's just sitting on their hands waiting for the phone to ring, looking for something to do. I mean, anything we can do to reduce the time it takes in modern IT work like this. This has to be like a significant reduction factor so that you can get onto those other things on your to-do list you'd rather do instead of sitting there and filling out change controls all day.
Exactly. And cyber too. Cyber and risk teams also benefit a lot from the automation as now they don't have to worry about copying and pasting into a change ticket, what they're doing, how they're doing it, what their recommendations are, etc. So all of that is very important to simplify as much as you can, but yet still offer a very powerful end-to-end life cycle with a lot of automation and take away the manual work.
And boy, I tell you, having that audit trail, that really, it brings all your audit trail into one common interface where you're expecting, or you've got that data normally. Now you don't have to chase that down in a bunch of other tools and try to cobble it together in spreadsheets. Now you've got a single source for that audit trail. That's huge. It saves so much time on the patching activity itself, the putting the list together, creating the change, and then auditing it later. This really just shines on so many levels. And I know I'm a Tanium employee. I do this all the time on this show, but that's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's a wonderful solution. It's free on the market. There's no additional cost to purchase it from ServiceNow. And I would advise every customer, if you have the opportunity, take advantage of it. It is by far one of the better end-to-end lifecycle solutions on the ServiceNow platform that supports scale. So I'll leave you with that, Ashley, and I think it's a great opportunity for everyone to try out.
To clarify what you just said, it's free. The Tanium integration in the store is free. You have to already own the licensing on the Tanium side for things like comply and patch. And on the ServiceNow side, what's the name of the offering there that they must license also?
Yeah, so vulnerability response is the main offering for vulnerability scan data. And then vulnerability response enterprise also gives you the ability to have patch orchestration through change workflows. So you do need vulnerability response enterprise to kind of do the end-to-end lifecycle management that we showed you earlier.
Well, Sakab, thank you so much for coming on the show today to show us this really powerful integration. It saves time for so many different teams. This is amazing, folks, to see that full life cycle of scanning for patches, submitting the change, executing the change, having the close on the change, the audit trail, all that full life cycle between Tanium and ServiceNow. That's the power of this better together story. So there you have it. Also be aware in the show notes below, we've already talked about if you go out to help.tanium.com, you go look at the integrations, ServiceNow, there's your links on documentation for how to get this going. And with that documentation and these videos, you can really set this up for yourself as you saw earlier in the video. So thanks for joining us for today's Tanium Tech Talk. And until next time, go Tanium.